Yo, how's it going, everybody? Swagkage here, and welcome to today's video. The subject matter should be pretty obvious. The title and thumbnail should have made it quite evident that I'm going to be talking about how I think Naruto should have ended, but let me place some emphasis on the I think part of that sentence. In simpler terms, I don't claim to speak on behalf of everybody. This is my own opinion, at least for the most part. I'm gonna base a handful of changes on the fan base's general consensus about a particular plot point or series moment, but for the most part, this is gonna be based entirely on my own opinion. Though some disagreements are unavoidable, you're not gonna see eye to eye with me on everything that I say throughout this video, but I hope most of you still enjoy it nonetheless. Now, I might be getting a bit ahead of myself. Some of you may be a little confused, so let me briefly outline how I'm going to be laying out this video. First of all, it's a follow-up to a video I posted last week talking about how I feel Naruto's war arc could have been improved. Now, you don't have to go watch the video by any means. As a matter of fact, I don't really think you're missing out on much if you don't go watch it, but maybe if you do check it out, it'll give you a better idea of the frame of mind that I'm approaching this from. So if you want to go watch it first, I guess I'll leave a link in the description, or you can just go find the video on my channel, but that doesn't really matter. The main reason I brought it up is because I'm going to be picking up where I left off in that video, which is the point at which Madara arrived on the battlefield. Now, the thumbnail, and I guess the title to some extent, may have led you to believe that I'm going to be strictly discussing the very end of Naruto, with Kaguya, Naruto versus Sasuke, the Sage of Six Paths, and all of that. And I will get to covering that stuff, so don't worry. But in order to do that, I'm gonna have to start by tackling all the stuff that came directly before it. As a matter of fact, that's the only reason I made last week's video about the war arc in the first place, because the ideal ending that I have in mind for Naruto requires making a lot of narrative changes starting from as early as the beginning of the war arc. And since I already made an entire video about the war arc, I think it only makes sense for me to start talking about how I think the final arc could have been different. So that's what we're gonna be doing in this video. Without wasting any more time on this incredibly lengthy intro segment, let's just get right into the topic at hand and start discussing how Naruto's final arc and how its ending could have been better. So just like I said in last week's video, the overall story structure is gonna remain the same. I really like the vision that Kishimoto had in mind for the end of the series. He just made a lot of really bad calls as an author, and it resulted in a final product that wasn't nearly as good as it should have been. Now, the first sign of this sloppiness is the insane amount of ass pulls, contradictions, deus ex machina, and things of that nature. This shit is fucking omnipresent throughout Naruto's final arc. And now look, it's possible to justify a lot of this stuff by doing some pretty arduous mental gymnastics, but first of all, that should never be expected of a reader, and second of all, that only applies to some of these examples. The others are just straight up plot holes or contrivances. At best, they're extremely convenient coincidences, and then there are also just plenty of instances of really bad or stupid writing. Let me provide a list of examples of to go over. I also neglected to mention a handful of other things, like how Obito arbitrarily opted not to use his Rinnegan abilities, probably because Kishimoto just decided it would make him too powerful. Like, I get it, apparently they consume a lot of chakra, but Obito was casually controlling six-tailed beasts at once. Plus, he didn't even start using his Rinnegan powers after he became Jubito, so what fucking gives? Another example is how Sakura got this miraculous fucking power-up that propelled her from maybe like high Chunin, low Jonin level to above Kage level, and it didn't really end up amounting to dick bubkiss. She didn't accomplish diddly squat with it. Or the fact that Obito had half of his body crushed underneath the weight of a cave, but his Sharingan was left perfectly intact, and Madara was still able to save him somehow. And don't even get me started on how Naruto talked no jutsu to Obito. That made me incredibly upset, and I could probably spend an entire video ranting about that alone. Anyway, let's move on. I've been talking about these issues for quite a long time now, and I think it's about time for me to start discussing how I think they can be fixed. So first of all, I don't really have any problems with how Madara was handled, at least not at the beginning of the arc. His battle against the 4th Division and against the 5 Kage is totally fine, but the battles against Obito and Kabuto both need to be completely overhauled. So let's start with Kabuto. Alright, so first off, Itachi doesn't really need to be there, and at the very least, he should not be carrying the entire battle. Now, I know a lot of people, myself included, really did like seeing Itachi and Sasuke fight alongside one another for the first time ever, but Sasuke didn't really do anything in the fight. And again, Itachi's presence isn't really required. Like, you just have to nerf Kabuto, and then Sasuke would be able to take him on 1v1. It'd be a much better way to show what Sasuke's capable of with his EMS, because we never really got a good introductory battle to serve that purpose, because as soon as he started fighting seriously against the Ten Tails and then eventually Jubito, all of his feats were kind of overshadowed by Naruto's. So the point is, either don't have Itachi there, or have Sasuke contribute just as much as Itachi did in the fight. Second thing, and the most important thing, is Izanami needs to be taken out completely. This was a really stupid jutsu, extremely overpowered insta-kill move that Kabuto had no way to defend himself against. It was like the worst kind of Deus Ex Machina, came out of nowhere, and when Itachi beat Kabuto with it, the victory didn't feel earned. Now, obviously, Sasuke and Itachi can't kill Kabuto. If they do that, he can't release the Edo Tensei, and that would leave the allied shinobi forces in a bit of a pickle. But a very easy way to force Kabuto to undo the jutsu would be having Itachi, if you decide to keep him around, of course, press him so hard that he has to undo Edo Tensei in order to survive. Have Sasuke and Itachi back Kabuto into a corner through teamwork, where he's about to get pierced by the Totsuka blade, and is thereby forced to release the jutsu in order to get Itachi off the battlefield. This would also be a much better way to lead Sasuke and Kabuto to the battlefield, without having Kabuto go through that really stupid Izanami self-discovery process, and without having Sasuke forced to talk to the Hokage. Obviously, his conversation with Itachi could help change his worldview a little bit, make him a bit less hell-bent on destroying Konoha or something like that. But if Kabuto found out that Madara had resisted the Edo Tensei release, he'd probably head straight to the battlefield after finding this out, in order to attempt to seal Madara himself, and Sasuke would follow him in hot pursuit. Now, I don't want to speak for anybody else, but to me, this sounds a lot more organic than what happened in the original series. Anyway, this brings me to my next point. Orochimaru should not come back. That didn't make sense at all. That was really weird. He was sealed inside of Itachi's Susanoo gourd by the Totsuka blade, but somehow he had chakra residue on a curse mark somewhere and was able to, like, crawl out. Like, at best, that wasn't Orochimaru. That was some kind of weird Senjutsu clone or something. Anyway, by extension, if Orochimaru doesn't come back, then the first 4 Hokage can't either. And look, I know a lot of people probably aren't gonna agree, but it didn't make any sense for there to be this Reaper release mask just lying around in the Hidden Leaf Village that nobody knew about but Orochimaru, especially because Kabuto wanted to add the first 4 Hokage to his arsenal, but he said he couldn't because they were all trapped inside the belly of the Reapers. So if Orochimaru knew about this, surely Kabuto would as well. There are just a whole lot of reasons why this plot device doesn't make sense, and so even though it's at the expense of a lot of really cool moments, the first 4 Hokage, they don't need to return. By extension, Naruto should not only be the Jinchuriki of half of the 9 tails, he should definitely have the whole thing, because having Minato, like, split it in half just so that he can have Biju mode, it was very bizarre to say the least. Alright, so next up, Obito. Now, he is a lot more difficult to handle because of one thing in particular, that being he completes the 10 tails without either Gyuki or Kurama. And now, this is kind of dumb because it shits on the entire war arc by invalidating it. It just begs the question, okay then, if it was that simple, why did he even declare war against the allied shinobi forces? He could have just used the tentacle that B left behind when Sasuke was sent to capture him, and I'm sure he could have gathered some residual chakra some other way. Like, there's no way you can tell me it would have been easier to wipe out Naruto plus all of the other ninja on the planet than it would have been for him to just capture Naruto by himself, right? The war serves no purpose if you make it this easy for him to complete the 10 tails. So he has to extract Gyuki from Killer Bee and add it to the Geto Mazo, which is thankfully much easier now that he's in possession of the Rinnegan, and he can just use the chains to call the Biju back into the statue. And this would be cool because you'd get a really emotional death scene. You know, Naruto had been bonding with Bee throughout the entire war arc, but Naruto's, he's much tougher, because realistically, Obito would need to get Kurama from Naruto as well, leaving him without his Biju mode, the thing that he had been working to acquire for the whole arc, and also he'd die. Now, you could easily reverse Naruto's death using Kisho Tensei. This is the jutsu that Chiyo used to bring Gaara back from the dead. When the exact same thing happened to him, he had his Biju extracted from his body. But the problem of Naruto not being able to access his Biju mode still exists. And it would definitely be a huge slap in the face to everybody to see Naruto work to master this form for the entire arc, only to have his ability to use it stripped away from him, at least temporarily. Though I will say, this opens the door for a very nice emotional moment between Naruto and Kurama. He finally manages to befriend the Nine-Tails, and then as soon as he does, it gets ripped right out of his body. Now, the way you could go about having the Nine-Tails extracted from Naruto would be a battle between he and Madara. I'm pretty sure Madara could use the Rinnegan rods to immobilize Naruto, at which point Obito would be able to extract the Nine-Tails and subsequently form the Ten-Tails. Now, I need to back up a bit because if all of this happens, it raises the question, well, okay, then who's supposed to bring Naruto back to life? And the only person who I think would feasibly be able to use Kisho Tensei is Tsunade. So she'd have to give her life in exchange for Naruto. Now, this would create a really bleak fucking tone for the rest of the arc because B just died, Naruto nearly died, and Tsunade had to die in order to bring him back to life. Kurama's gone. You just have all these really great character moments. You know, Sakura having to come to terms with the fact that Tsunade's dead. Now, I'm not sure how Tsunade would get to the battlefield after being cut in half by Madara. I'm pretty sure Katsuyu would heal her the same way she did in the main series, but it would take a really long time. So Naruto might be out of commission for a while. But what I think would happen is the Ten-Tails would get completed, and like in the main series, the allied shinobi forces would show up right after this. Everyone would notice Naruto's corpse lying on the floor, and Sakura would immediately volunteer to head to the location where the 5 Kage were last seen so that she could heal Tsunade and see if Tsunade could do anything to heal Naruto. At this point, Tsunade would be like, yeah, the only thing I can do is give my life in exchange for his, and he's a much more valuable asset to the team now than I am. This would be really cool because Sakura would have to come to terms with the fact that her mentor is dead, but on the flip side, she'd probably be very eager to take up Tsunade's mantle, and at that point, she activates the Byakugo, and it buffs her way more than it did in the main series. I'm talking like putting her at sub-Naruto and Sasuke levels. It would be really awesome to see her finally accomplish some shit just like she did in the battle against Sasori, and it'd be really easy to justify to the audience too because her chakra control, which is the thing responsible for her insane level of strength, has been being hyped up since the beginning of the Land of Waves arc. Maybe not sub-Naruto and Sasuke level, but I really want Sakura to be able to contribute. That's all that matters to me. Also, Tsunade's death would be really fitting because Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura are the 3 students of the 3 Sannin, respectively, and seeing them reunite like this right after the death of the last of the 3 Sannin would be really cool. Some nice symbolic shit, you know? Now, one thing I forgot to go over is the backstory between Obito and Madara. First of all, don't have Kakashi unlock the Mangekyo Sharingan after killing Rin. That was dumb. Just have him train to unlock it like he initially did in the main series before the retcon. 2, figure out some other fucking way for Madara to save Obito from the boulder. I mean, I'm kind of out of ideas, but here's the thing. I don't want to change Tobi to be a different character because I associate him way too heavily with Obito now, and I do like Obito for what he is, but something needs to be done so that Obito's rescue doesn't seem nearly as asinine. Madara could use Rene Rebirth, but that wouldn't really make sense because Nagato was currently in possession of his Rinnegan, and it just wouldn't make any chronological sense for this not to be the case because I'm pretty sure Nagato awakened the Rinnegan in the second Shinobi World War. Obito got crushed by the boulder in the third, so Rene Rebirth can't have, but Kishimoto could probably fucking think of something. Anyway, on that note, Obito shouldn't mention him, like, at all. There are a lot of people under the impression that he started the entire Fourth War because of her, and granted, he does say that that's not the reason, but I can't blame people for not believing that, because, look, Obito mentions Rin quite a few times. As a matter of fact, she's one of the first things he brings up after he's unmasked. Like, immediately, he just says to Kakashi, you let Rin die, and talking about her this much, flashing back to her this much, it gives the readers an impression that Obito started the whole war just because he was upset he didn't get to put his dick inside of her. So that can still be the straw that broke the camel's back, seeing his best friend kill the girl he's in love with, but nothing more. He shouldn't still be mentioning it like 25 fucking years down the road. Anyway, moving on to Jubito and the the Ten Tails itself, I think that Obito and Madara can still become the Jinchuriki of the Ten Tails, though I think the process for how they just absorb the entire fucking Jubi needs to be elaborated on. I think a really unique method of doing it would be having Obito or Madara use the Rinnegan to take control of somebody from the allied shinobi forces and have them perform Reaper Death Seal or something of that nature. Now, admittedly, you need somebody pretty fucking strong to seal the entire Ten Tails into somebody, but it makes more sense than them just arbitrarily absorbing the Jubi and becoming its Jinchuriki somehow. I mean, I don't really care how it's done as long as it's elaborated upon. Make becoming the Jinchuriki an actually interesting process. Maybe make it something that all of the members of the allied shinobi forces are in theory able to do, but don't want to because of the point I'm about to bring up next, which is the fact that the Jubi should be impossible to tame. At full power, the Nine Tails nearly broke free of Naruto's body, so I don't see why the fucking Ten Tails wouldn't be able to do the same to Obito and Madara. So the difficulty of keeping the Ten Tails in check would be enough to offset Obito's ability to use Kamui, I think. Like, he'd be so preoccupied trying to keep this thing from murdering him from the inside that I don't think the ability to phase through objects would make him too threatening. I know it was done as a balancing mechanic in the original series, and it was one that probably needed to be implemented, but making it extremely difficult for Obito to focus on combat due to the fact that he constantly has to suppress the Ten Tails is a pretty good alternative, especially because his inability to use Kamui didn't really make a whole lot of sense. Eventually, the Ten Tails would break out of his body due to the pressure being put on him by the rest of the allied shinobi forces fighting him all at once. I mean, that would certainly make a lot more sense than Naruto performing Talk no Jutsu and using a moment of weakness created by that jutsu to tear through Obito and rip the Jubi out that way. Regardless, after the Jubi breaks free, Madara becomes its Jinchuriki, thinking that he has a much better chance of taming it. Of course, in the meantime, he'd have to get Obito to use Rene Rebirth, and now this is a problem, because I think the fact that Obito survived both a tailed beast extraction and casting Rene Rebirth, two things that have been individually responsible for multiple deaths throughout the series, by themselves, again, emphasis on individually, is really dumb. You could probably explain it away by having Madara attach Black Zetsu to Obito's body the same way he did in the main series, and artificially pump chakra into his body to keep him alive that way, because in this ending, Zetsu still belongs to Madara, not fucking Kaguya, so Madara can transmit chakra through him. Then Obito uses Rene Rebirth, and then uses whatever sealing jutsu he did earlier to seal the Ten Tails into Madara's body. Madara would also retrieve both of his Rinnegan much more easily, since I think it would be reasonable to assume he could use Zetsu to suppress Obito's chakra and keep him from using Kamui to go into the other dimension. That way he wouldn't have to follow him there by taking Kakashi's eye, which was also really silly. Then he would tear through everybody, Guy would get his moment in the spotlight, and the Guy would stay dead because, trust me, his sacrifice would have much more emotional impact than keeping him alive would. But this brings me to what the fuck are Naruto and Sasuke gonna do? Because at this point, I feel like half of the allied shinobi forces would be dead, and Naruto and Sasuke would both be on the brink of death. Because, look, all Naruto would have access to is Sage Mode now. He's not really gonna be able to do much against the Jubi Jinchuriki Madara, and EMS Sasuke would have the exact same issue. But I don't like the Sage of Six Paths appearing out of nowhere with no explanation. That was a huge head scratcher for me, and yet at the same time, I do like the powers that he gave Naruto and Sasuke access to. So here's how I think I would alter the Sage of Six Paths appearance. He would still show up. It would be done through this weird, unorthodox variation of the jutsu that Minato and Kushina used to seal themselves in Naruto's psyche, where they would come forth whenever a specified event or series of events took place. Something like that would allow the Sage of Six Paths to either appear in the psyche of both Naruto and Sasuke, or appear as an illusion on the battlefield, or like send his chakra to Earth or something. You know, what he could do is, a certain amount of time after the revival of the Ten Tails, he could have a seal somewhere that goes off and projects his chakra somewhere into the world, where he'd be able to meet with Naruto and Sasuke and give them some of his power. And this is where I think Naruto would get his Kyuubi chakra mode back, because the Sage of Six Paths could remark that his Nine Tails chakra mode was very similar to Asura's three-headed avatar, and he'd be like, well, I can give you an ability just like that, no need to worry. On that note, they should not be fucking reincarnates of Indra and Ashura. That was actually the dumbest thing that Kishimoto did while writing Naruto. It completely shit on the entire premise that the story first had. It took Naruto from an underdog to the reincarnation of Jesus, and I mean that borderline literally. So that whole plot point, that needs to be dismissed. Naruto and Sasuke can still get the powers though, and you can still draw a lot of parallels between the two of them and Indra and Ashura, but you don't don't have to make them actual fucking reincarnates of the two. The two of them would then go on to fight Madara in an extremely lengthy battle where Madara would have the upper hand for pretty much the entire time because he's way too overpowered, but he, like Obito, would have to fight against the Ten Tails breaking free from his body. Eventually, he'd succumb to the same fate as Obito when Naruto and Sasuke are both on the brink of dying. The Ten Tails would break free, and Naruto and Sasuke would see an opportunity to seal it away. Now, this is where I think you could set up a lot of cool things that already happened in the ending with much better explanations. So first of all, now that they're both equipped to handle this thing, Naruto and Sasuke would react two completely different ways to seeing the Ten Tails. Sasuke's first instinct would be to either kill it or seal it away, whereas Naruto would want to try and use his Six Paths powers to split it back into the 9 Biju, especially if he'd just established a friendship with Kurama right before he'd been extracted from him. Now, this would help strengthen the foundation of the conflict that goes on between Naruto and Sasuke later on in the arc. It would give Sasuke a much better direct reference to draw from as to why he thinks Naruto isn't fit to be Hokage, and it'd also give them a much more visible thing to fight over than just their philosophy, which you hadn't really gotten to see any of from Sasuke in the first place. It just sort of came out of nowhere. Also, this could be a much better way to justify Kaguya's appearance. Trying to fuck around with the Ten Tails by using the creation of all things, the same jutsu that the Sage of Six Paths used to initially split it into the 9 Biju, might end up leading Naruto to accidentally send Kaguya's conscious back to the forefront of the Ten Tails' mind, allowing her to take over, and through some kind of transformation jutsu or something, compress her body back into its original form. Now, I say with a transformation jutsu because I think Kaguya's transition into the Ten Tails should have been permanent. It didn't really make a whole lot of sense for her to take Madara's body over and then suddenly have access to her regular body again. Like, she became the Ten Tails as a consequence of eating the fruit of the Shinju tree, and that's how it should have stayed. The only reason she didn't initially transform back, I thought anyway, was because over the course of becoming the Ten Tails, she was slowly driven insane, but regaining her consciousness and awareness would fix this problem. She'd still be batshit crazy, but she'd at least be a bit more composed, and I think she needs to be a lot more composed and a lot more intelligent than she was in the main series. Also, on the subject of Kaguya, don't tie Black Zetsu to her. That was a dumb plot twist. I think it was perfectly fine for him to be the manifestation of Madara as well, and him writing all of shinobi history was really stupid too. Now, like I said, Kaguya doesn't need to show up, but personally, I really like her design, and I think that given the ending I'm going for, where the Ten Tails breaks out of Madara and Naruto and Sasuke don't actually beat him, it would be a lot more satisfying for there to be an actual threatening enemy that isn't only defeated because of the fact that they're unable to control their power. Naruto and Sasuke would then go to take Kaguya out. No perfect Susanoo on Kakashi's behalf or any of that. Sakura could still get involved, and Kakashi could still too, considering he still has access to Obito's Sharingan since Madara never popped it out. Though I think I would restrict Kaguya's abilities, keep her from being a fucking dimension hopper. That way she can't trap Naruto, Sasuke, Sakura, and Kakashi in another dimension so that the Sage of Six Paths has to summon every Kage ever from the dead to use a summoning jutsu to bring them back. Like, that was really dumb. Again, Kaguya doesn't have to show up. I just think that it would feel better as a reader, and it would make the ending feel less incomplete if after the Ten Tails broke free from Madara, we had an actual threat. You know, it would just feel really empty if Naruto and Sasuke didn't really get the win there, and then nothing else followed. Regardless, directly after the last antagonist, Naruto and Sasuke have their little scuffle. Though Sasuke wouldn't have the extra insight he received from Hashirama, he would still probably have his resolve shifted a bit, thanks to his conversation and meeting with Itachi. He could also have a lengthy conversation with the Sage of Six Paths, asking him to tell him the truth about everything that's gone on throughout all of shinobi history, since if the Sage of Six Paths is capable of summoning himself to the real world despite the fact that he died like 1,000 years ago, then surely he'd be able to tell Sasuke about a bunch of major historical developments in the shinobi world. This would lead Sasuke to develop his plan, but in my opinion, Sasuke's plan shouldn't be to unite the world against him, but rather just to rule as an authoritarian dictator with an iron fist. A secondary consequence of doing this could be to unite everybody against him. I'm pretty sure that's what he was going for in the original manga, as a matter of fact, but I think much more emphasis should be placed on the fact that he plans to snuff out all crime, sort of like Kira from Death Note, since nobody alive would have any chance of taking him out. Naruto and Sasuke have their final battle, then the series comes to an end. Madara and Obito don't get redeemed. They don't fucking be like, well, you guys were right all along. The infinite Tsukuyomi doesn't turn people into Zetsu. And I think that after Naruto becomes Hokage, it shouldn't be established that the world has achieved true peace. He's still trying to search for the answer, and even though the 5 great nations have allied with one another, there still need to be problems brewing amongst them. This would give Naruto and the rest of the characters a good chance to reflect on Madara's goal and ask themselves if the Infinite Tsukuyomi really was all that bad. As for ships and stuff, I'm not really gonna get into all of that. Personally, I would have liked to see Sasuke kill Sakura, but I don't really mind the two of them getting together in the end either. Also, the series should actually end here. I'd really prefer if Boruto didn't have...